The dim lighting of the conference room cast long shadows across the polished mahogany table where my colleagues gathered, laughter echoing off the walls. It was a baby shower for one of our team members, a rare moment of levity in our high-pressure corporate environment. Mr. Thompson, our VP, stood at the front, holding a gift wrapped in bright blue paper, his expression a mix of mischief and authority. "And here's a little something to help you with compliance," he joked, making a mockery of the very report that had consumed my late nights. I felt a knot tighten in my stomach, a mixture of discomfort and a strange urge to laugh along with everyone else. The awkward chuckles that followed felt like a betrayal of my instincts. I glanced around the room, noting the hesitant smiles on my colleagues' faces. Did they see the danger in his words, or were they just as blinded by loyalty? My mind raced back to the countless hours I had spent compiling that report, ensuring every detail was precise, every guideline meticulously followed. To hear it belittled in such a casual manner stung more than I expected. I had trusted Mr. Thompson, believed he valued our hard work, but now doubt crept in, whispering that perhaps he saw us merely as pawns in his game of power. As the laughter faded, a heavy silence settled over the room, punctuated only by the sound of clinking glasses. I felt the weight of my own thoughts pressing down on me. What if this is just the beginning? I wondered. The thought of our compliance efforts being reduced to a punchline made my heart race with anxiety. I wanted to confront him, to challenge his mockery, but the fear of repercussions held me back. I could almost feel the eyes of my colleagues on me, silently questioning my loyalty. Later, in the solitude of my office, I replayed the moment over and over in my mind. The tension from the baby's shower lingered, and I couldn't shake the feeling that something much bigger was at stake. I needed to decide, would I remain loyal to a man who trivialized our work, or would I stand up for the integrity of our team? The stakes were rising, and I could sense the impending storm brewing. My phone buzzed, pulling me from my thoughts, and I glanced at the screen. A text from my best friend, urging me to come out for a drink, felt like a lifeline. Yet deep down, I knew I had to face the truth, no matter how uncomfortable it might be. The fallout from that mockery was just beginning to unfold, and I was right in the eye of the storm. The weight of the previous day's events lingered in the air as I stepped into my home office, where the faint scent of burnt coffee clung to the walls. I sat in front of my desk, cluttered with half-finished compliance reports and stacks of paperwork, but my mind was elsewhere, replaying Mr. Thompson's mockery. It was as if the laughter from the baby shower echoed in my ears, reminding me of the uncomfortable alliance I was forming with my own doubts. I felt a tightness in my chest, a blend of confusion and frustration swirling within me. As I scrolled through my phone, the screen lit up with messages from my partner, asking about dinner plans. I hesitated, unsure if I should share my turmoil. Would they understand the gravity of what was happening? The pressure to maintain my job while grappling with the VP's carelessness weighed heavily on me. My fingers trembled slightly as I typed back a vague response, hiding the storm brewing inside. Images of the office meeting room flashed in my mind, where I had witnessed the ripple effects of that mockery. How could I confront Mr. Thompson? The very thought sent my heart racing. Would he dismiss my concerns as mere overreactions? I recalled the way he had smirked, the arrogance in his demeanor as if he were untouchable. I have to speak up, I told myself, though the words felt hollow against the backdrop of my anxiety. That night sleep eluded me as I tossed and turned, the shadows of my thoughts dancing on the walls. I recalled a time when I had stood up for what I believed in, fiercely defending a colleague who had faced unjust criticism. But this was different. This time, it was my job at stake, and the stakes felt infinitely higher. I needed to find a way to navigate this treacherous path without losing everything I had worked for. The next morning, I returned to the office, the fluorescent lights flickering above me as I took a deep breath. The air was thick with tension, and I could feel the weight of my decision pressing down on my shoulders. I knew I had to confront Mr. Thompson, but how could I frame my words? Would he even listen? As I approached his office, my heart pounded loudly in my ears. The door stood ajar, a thin sliver of light spilling out, and I felt a surge of resolve mixed with fear. This was the moment I had to seize, the moment that would define my path forward. I paused, my hand hovering over the doorknob, taking a moment to gather my thoughts. I couldn't let fear dictate my actions any longer. My silence was never consent, and it was time to make that clear. I pushed the door open, stepping into the lion's den, ready to face whatever lay ahead. The atmosphere in the office was thick with unspoken tension, a palpable unease that settled like a fog after the VP's mockery. I navigated the maze of cubicles, the fluorescent lights buzzing above, casting a harsh glare on the faces of my colleagues. Their eyes darted away as I passed, whispers trailing behind me like shadows. The air smelled stale, laced with the faint aroma of burnt coffee from the break room, a reminder of the chaos that now loomed over our compliance team. My heart raced as I approached the break room, the walls adorned with posters of company achievements that seemed to mock my current predicament. I could hear snippets of conversation, laughter attempting to push through the underlying dread. "Did you hear about the DOJ?" one colleague whispered, her voice barely above a murmur. Panic gripped me, tightening around my chest. The Department of Justice? It was as if the world around me began to collapse under the weight of that single phrase. I pushed the door open, and the sudden rush of warmth enveloped me, momentarily distracting from my spiraling thoughts. The room was filled with my coworkers, their faces a mixture of concern and forced cheerfulness. I felt like an outsider, standing at the threshold of a gathering that no longer felt welcoming. "We need to talk about what happened with Thompson," I said, my voice steadier than I felt. The room fell silent, eyes widening, and I could sense the collective intake of breath. One colleague, Mark, looked at me, his brow furrowed in confusion. "What do you mean? It was just a joke, right?" His words cut deeper than I expected. I clenched my fists, nails digging into my palms. "A joke that could cost us everything," I replied, my voice rising slightly, desperation creeping in. "If the DOJ is involved, this is serious." Their expressions shifted, the realization sinking in like the cold grip of a winter's night. I could see the cogs turning in their minds, weighing loyalty against the bitter taste of potential betrayal. Anxiety bubbled within me, threatening to spill over. How could they brush this off? Did they not understand the gravity of the situation? I felt anger flare up, fueled by the fear of losing everything I'd worked for. As my colleagues exchanged worried glances, I took a deep breath, trying to ground myself. The stakes were rising, and I couldn't let my emotions cloud my judgment. "We need a plan," I stated, my tone firm, cutting through the tension like a knife. "We can't let this go unchecked. If we don't act, we risk everything." Mark nodded slowly, his earlier bravado crumbling. "You're right, but what can we do? Thompson won't listen." I could see the doubt etched in his features, and it mirrored my own fears. "Then we need to find a way to expose the truth," I replied, determination replacing the anxiety swirling in my gut. "We can't let him mock our work and walk away unscathed." "This ends with me." The murmurs of agreement began to rise around me, a chorus of reluctant acceptance. As we discussed our next steps, a sense of urgency fueled the conversation, and I could feel the adrenaline coursing through me. But the reality of the DOJ's involvement loomed heavily over us, casting a shadow over our resolve. I could hardly wrap my mind around the consequences that were about to unfold. After the meeting, I returned to my desk, the walls feeling like they were closing in. I glanced at the compliance report I had poured my soul into, the carefully crafted words now feeling like a fragile barrier against the storm that was about to hit. The phone rang, jolting me from my thoughts. I answered, my voice steady but my heart pounding as I recognized the number. It was the DOJ. "Miss Ashley, we need to discuss the compliance report submitted last month. There are concerns we need to address immediately." I swallowed hard, fear creeping back into my chest. This was the moment I had dreaded, the fallout from the VP's carelessness now materializing in the form of a federal investigation. My stomach churned, but I knew I had to stand firm. I wouldn't be reduced to a punchline. As the call ended, I felt a surge of clarity wash over me amidst the chaos. This was it. The moment I had to confront not just Mr. Thompson, but the entire system that allowed such injustice to fester. I had a plan forming in my mind, one that would leverage the truth against the facade of power. I was ready to fight for the integrity of my company, no matter the cost. Back in my cramped home office, the walls seemed to close in on me, the weight of my choices pressing heavily on my chest. A faint whiff of burnt coffee lingered, mixing with the scent of old paperwork that cluttered my desk, reminding me of the countless hours I had spent trying to keep everything together. I could feel my heart racing as I thought about the DOJ's call, the implications of that conversation swirling in my mind like a storm cloud. The stakes had never felt higher, and I was caught at the center of it all. I needed to act, but the fear of what could happen if I did paralyzed me. I glanced at the compliance report I had poured my heart into, its pages filled with meticulous details that now felt like a fragile barrier against the chaos threatening to consume my career. How had it come to this? My fingers trembled as I tapped the pen against my desk, each click echoing the turmoil in my mind. Should I confront Mr. Thompson directly, or was that just an invitation for disaster? The thought of facing him sent a wave of anxiety washing over me, but not taking action felt equally unbearable. The memory of the break room conversation replayed in my mind, my colleagues' faces, the doubt etched in their features. "We need to find a way to expose the truth," I had said, but now those words felt like a distant echo, a call to arms I wasn't sure I could answer. I wanted to be strong, to lead the charge against the mockery that had belittled our work, but could I shoulder the repercussions of such a decision? What if it all backfired and I ended up losing everything? Taking a deep breath, I forced myself to focus. I needed a plan, something concrete that wouldn't just be a reaction to fear, but a calculated move that could turn the tide in my favor. I reached for my laptop, the cool metal grounding me as I opened a blank document. The screen lit up, casting a soft glow in the dim room, and I began to jot down my thoughts, my goals, the risks, and the potential allies I could rally. I could feel clarity starting to seep in, each word a step toward resolve. What if I approached my colleagues again, armed with a strategy? I could remind them of the stakes, of how our integrity was on the line. Together we could confront Mr. Thompson, but I needed to be careful. I couldn't let my desperation show. I recalled the fierce glint in Mark's eyes when I had first spoke up. Perhaps he would back me up, rallying others to our cause. If I could gather enough support, maybe we could turn this around. As I drafted my plan, a sense of determination washed over me. The clarity I sought was finally beginning to take shape, pushing aside the fog of doubt that had clouded my mind. I would not be a passive player in this game. I was done being reduced to a punchline. The mockery I had witnessed was not just a reflection of Mr. Thompson's arrogance, it was a challenge, and I was ready to rise to it. With every word I typed, my resolve solidified. This ends with me, I thought, a silent promise echoing in the depths of my mind. I had a path forward now, one that would take me directly to the heart of the issue. I could feel the adrenaline coursing through me, filling me with a fierce sense of purpose. It was time to take action, to confront the very foundations of the corporate facade I had once trusted. My heart pounded in rhythm with my thoughts, the anticipation of what lay ahead igniting a fire within me. I was ready to step into the fray and fight for justice, no matter the cost. The atmosphere in the office felt charged, a low hum of anxiety rippling through the cubicles as I entered. I could smell the faint scent of burnt coffee mingling with the cheap air freshener that barely masked the tension. My colleagues were scattered around, their faces a mixture of concern and forced cheerfulness, as if trying to maintain a facade amidst the brewing storm. I had called this impromptu meeting, desperate to find a way forward, but the weight of uncertainty hung heavily in the air. I stood at the front, my palms clammy against the cool surface of the conference table, heart racing as I prepared to address my team. We need to talk about the DOJ's involvement and how it relates to what's been happening with Mr. Thompson, I began, my voice steadier than I felt. A flicker of hope ignited within me, but I could sense the hesitation in their eyes. They exchanged glances, uncertainty palpable as they processed the gravity of my words. Isn't it just a misunderstanding? The VP always jokes around, one of my colleagues, Sarah, said, her voice wavering. I could see the conflict in her eyes, caught between loyalty to our VP and the burgeoning fear of the potential fallout. He has a way of making things seem less serious than they are. Less serious, I echoed, an edge creeping into my tone. This isn't about jokes anymore. The DOJ could tear our department apart if we don't act. I felt a surge of frustration bubbling up. The stakes were too high for complacency. I glanced at Mark, who had been one of the first to voice concern after the mockery at the baby shower. He nodded, his expression shifting from doubt to determination, which fueled my resolve. We need to come together, create a united front, I urged, my heart pounding in my chest. If we don't stand up to this, we risk losing everything we've worked for. I watched as the murmurs of agreement began to fill the room, a spark of hope igniting within me, but it was quickly overshadowed by the weight of reality. As the discussion continued, I felt the room start to close in on me. Voices blended into a murmur, and I struggled to maintain focus as the doubts crept back in. What if this was futile? What if my efforts only made things worse? The fear settled in my stomach like a heavy stone. I could feel the eyes of my colleagues on me, expectant and uncertain. The pressure mounted, and I struggled to keep my composure. Finally, as the meeting adjourned, I returned to my desk, the heaviness of disappointment weighing on my shoulders. I had hoped for a breakthrough, a moment of clarity that would unite us against the impending crisis, but instead, I felt the creeping despair of resignation. I glanced at the compliance report, the meticulously crafted document that now felt like a fragile shield against an avalanche. My fingers brushed against the papers, and I couldn't shake the feeling that we were slipping away from any chance of resolution. That night, as I returned home, the familiar scent of burnt coffee lingered in my nostrils, a reminder of the day's turmoil. I sat at my kitchen table, the flickering light overhead casting shadows across the room. My partner's voice drifted from the living room, but I was lost in my thoughts, replaying our meeting over and over. I had wanted to inspire hope, to rally my colleagues, but instead, I felt the weight of disappointment settle in. Was I fighting a losing battle? I couldn't shake the feeling that the moment for resolution was slipping away, and with it, my chance to right the wrongs that had been inflicted. I needed to gather my strength to prepare for the confrontation that awaited. The VP would have to answer for his actions, and I was determined to see this through, even if it meant facing the darkness alone. The fluorescent lights flickered ominously above me as I stood in the office, tension thick like fog in the air. The familiar scent of burnt coffee and stale paperwork lingered, but today, it felt suffocating instead of comforting. I gripped the edge of my desk, my palms slick with sweat, heart pounding in my chest as I thought about the call I had received from the Department of Justice. A storm was brewing, and I was right in its path. As I gathered my courage, memories of the mockery at the baby shower flooded my mind. Mr. Thompson's laughter echoed in my ears, a haunting reminder of the power dynamics at play. This ends with me, I had promised myself, but the weight of that resolve felt heavier than ever. I was prepared to confront him, but the stakes had escalated dramatically. The DOJ was involved now, and they wouldn't take kindly to my VP's cavalier attitude toward compliance. I stepped out of my office, the hallway stretching before me like a dark tunnel. The whispers of my colleagues faded into the background, their faces blurring as I focused on my goal. I remembered Mark's look of determination, the way he had nodded in agreement when I spoke of standing up against Thompson. Perhaps I wasn't alone in this fight after all. Reaching Thompson's office, I hesitated at the door, my heart racing as I recalled his earlier demeanor, arrogant, dismissive, untouchable. Taking a deep breath, I reminded myself that I had the truth on my side. I would not be silenced, and my silence was never consent. I pushed the door open, ready to face the man who had belittled our work and put us all at risk. This was the moment that would define everything, and I could feel the weight of it pressing down on my shoulders. "Mr. Thompson, we need to talk about the DOJ's involvement," I said, my voice steady despite the turmoil inside me. His response was a cold, calculating smile that sent a chill down my spine. I knew then that this was no longer just about compliance, it was about justice, and I was ready to fight for it, no matter the cost. As I locked eyes with him, a fierce determination ignited within me. I would expose the truth, and I would not back down. The confrontation had begun, and with it, the culmination of everything I had fought for was finally at hand. The dim light of my home office cast shadows across the clutter of compliance reports strewn haphazardly on my desk. I leaned back in my chair, the leather creaking beneath me as I inhaled the scent of stale coffee mingling with the musty pages of old documents. It was time to transform my anxiety into a plan, one that would confront Mr. Thompson and the mockery that had belittled our team. With a deep breath, I opened my laptop, the glow illuminating my resolute expression. I felt a rush of excitement mixed with nervousness as I began to outline my strategy. My fingers danced across the keyboard, typing out key points, each letter a step toward reclaiming the narrative. I needed to gather evidence of Thompson's mockery, to compile the reactions of my colleagues, and to document the potential fallout from the DOJ's involvement. I recalled the laughter that had echoed at the baby shower, the way I had felt like a lone voice of concern amidst a sea of complacency. No longer would I allow that moment to define me. I was ready to turn the tide. My colleagues could be allies if I approached them with a united front. I envisioned setting up an informal meeting, a safe space where they could voice their anxieties and concerns without fear of retribution. What if I framed it as a discussion about our department's integrity? I could stress how Thompson's cavalier attitude jeopardized not just our jobs, but the very foundation of our company. I could see Mark nodding in agreement, his earlier doubts melting away as he recognized the urgency of the situation. Together, we could strategize how to present our findings to upper management, pushing for accountability where there had been none. As the plan unfolded in my mind, determination coursed through me. "This ends with me," I thought fiercely, anchoring my resolve. I had to believe that my actions could inspire change, that confronting the absurdity of the VP's mockery would not only protect our team, but also restore a sense of dignity to our work. The adrenaline surged, and I felt alive with purpose. It was time to execute this plan, to confront the shadows of complacency head-on, and to ensure that the laughter that had once mocked us would transform into a chorus of truth and justice. As I stood outside Mr. Thompson's office, the fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, casting a harsh glare on the polished floor. The air was thick with tension, vibrating with the anxiety that had built up over the past few weeks. I could hear the soft murmurs of my colleagues just beyond the door, their voices a distant reminder of the stakes at hand. The weight of my decision pressed down on me, and the faint scent of burnt coffee wafted through the air, mingling with the sterile smell of the office. I felt my pulse quicken, each beat a reminder of the confrontation I was about to initiate. I took a deep breath, my fingers trembling slightly as I gripped the doorknob. Memories of the baby shower flashed through my mind, the laughter of my colleagues ringing in my ears, but now it felt like a cruel joke. Mr. Thompson's mockery had echoed through the halls, and it was time to confront him. Would he dismiss my concerns as mere paranoia? Would he laugh again, belittling our hard work? No, I couldn't let fear dictate my actions. Pushing the door open, I stepped inside, the air shifting as if the room itself recognized the gravity of the moment. Mr. Thompson sat behind his ornate desk, a smug expression on his face as he looked up from his papers. "Ah, Ashley, to what do I owe the pleasure?" he asked, his tone dripping with condescension. I felt a rush of anger bubble within me, but I held my ground, forcing my voice to remain steady. "We need to talk about your comments during the baby shower and the implications they have for our compliance efforts," I began, my voice steady but filled with an urgency I could hardly contain. He leaned back in his chair, crossing his arms, a smirk playing at the corners of his mouth. "Oh, come on, it was just a joke, Ashley, you're overreacting." I could feel my frustration boiling over. A joke that could cost us everything. "The DOJ is involved now and your mockery undermines our credibility." I stepped closer, my heart pounding as I fought to maintain my composure. He raised an eyebrow, the arrogance in his demeanor making me clench my fists at my sides. "You think the DOJ cares about a little humor? They're after serious issues, not our office banter," he retorted dismissively, his tone condescending. I could feel the anger radiating from my colleagues who had gathered outside, their hushed whispers vibrating through the walls. This wasn't just about me anymore, it was about all of us. "It's not just humor, it's a breach of trust. You've put us all at risk," I pressed on, my voice rising. I could see the flash of irritation in his eyes, but I couldn't back down. This was my moment, the culmination of all my fears and doubts. I will not be reduced to a punchline. My silence was never consent to this mockery. The room fell silent, the weight of my words hanging in the air like a storm cloud ready to burst. I could sense the shift in atmosphere, the way my colleagues leaned in, their eagerness to hear the truth ignited. Mr. Thompson's expression darkened, the smirk fading as he realized I wasn't backing down. "You're treading dangerous waters, Ashley. You don't know who you're up against," he warned, his voice low and threatening. I could feel the fear gnawing at my insides, but I stood my ground, refusing to let him intimidate me. "I know exactly who I'm up against, someone who thinks he can belittle hard work and get away with it. But this ends with me," I declared, the fire in my belly fueling my resolve. In that moment, I felt the support of my colleagues behind me, the weight of their silent encouragement pushing me forward. As I turned to leave, I knew this confrontation was just the beginning of a much larger battle. The stakes had never been higher, and the path ahead was fraught with uncertainty, but I was ready to fight. As I exited his office, the echoes of our exchange reverberated in my mind. I had taken the first step toward exposing the truth, and there was no turning back now. The fallout was inevitable, but I would face it head-on. The integrity of our team depended on it. The atmosphere in the office felt like a pressure cooker, every corner filled with whispered conversations and nervous glances. My colleagues, once so eager to brush off Mr. Thompson's mockery, now wore expressions of dread as the fallout began to unfold. The news of the DOJ's involvement had spread like wildfire, igniting panic among the team. I could hear the faint buzz of phones ringing, the sound mingling with the low hum of the air conditioning, creating an unsettling backdrop to the chaos. I sat at my desk, staring at the compliance report that now felt like a relic of a different time, a time when our hard work was respected. My heart raced, a mixture of relief and sorrow flooding me as I reflected on the confrontation with Thompson. I had stood my ground, but at what cost? My hands trembled slightly as I typed out an email to my colleagues, urging them to remain vigilant and prepared for what lay ahead. The stakes were higher than ever, and I needed to ensure we were united in our resolve. As I hit send, I felt a surge of determination. I wouldn't let fear dictate my actions any longer. Memories of the baby shower replayed in my mind, the laughter now tainted by the reality of our situation. I had confronted the mockery, but the battle was far from over. I knew the coming days would be fraught with challenges as we navigated the investigation. Would we be able to protect our integrity, or would the shadow of Thompson's arrogance loom over us indefinitely? Later that evening, I returned home, the familiar scent of burnt coffee filling the air, a stark contrast to the turmoil swirling in my mind. I sat at the kitchen table, the dim light casting shadows across my face as I contemplated my next steps. The weight of my choices pressed down on me, and I realized that while I had taken a stand, the journey toward justice would be long and arduous. I had opened Pandora's box, and now it was time to brace myself for the consequences. As I looked out the window, watching the sun dip below the horizon, I felt a flicker of hope. I had sparked a conversation, ignited a fire within my colleagues, and for the first time, I believed we could reclaim our narrative. The road ahead was uncertain.